don't think you have a future at NASA with that very slow countdown, but that's okay.
Astronauts would be like, what the hell? What the hell is he doing? Like, why is he taking so long? I'm just trying to build attention,
Oh, yeah,
before you're blasted into space, which I suppose in many ways is a similar experience to this podcast, right? It is a stellar thing, let's be honest, right? 138,000
we are going where very few have gone boldly before, as Kurt
Indeed,
said,
yes,
so.
yes. Right, so let's go. Ready? Here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tokyo Jazz Joints, episode 70. James, how are you this week?
Good, I'm good. It's getting a bit hot and humid here, Philip. To be honest, a little tiring, but I always
talking about the weather, yeah.
I'm always up for the jazz talk, you know that. So I'll get the energy sorted. Don't worry.
Fair enough. Well, look, it's episode 70, and I spent most of yesterday building a wardrobe, which was good, and I spent a lot of this morning trying to organize boxes and things, but as you say, always in the mood for a chat. And actually, I was feeling a little bit flat, and I'm feeling a little bit it's a kind of grey day outside as well, even though it's allegedly summer. So then
it's a great day in Ireland. It's kind of surprising.
Yeah. I did my old search through the photographs and went to February 2024. And I'll tell you where it wasn't grey was in Sasebo at 8 a.m. because I have a picture that we took inside the terminal and it was sunny. And this has really sort of got me going because this was probably... It's not the first time we've taken a boat on the Tokyo Jazz Joints Odyssey, but I remember specifically, so we had our very bizarre and very surreal closure to the previous evening in Easel in Sasebo, and then there was a lot, yes. I remember looking up the ferry times a lot, right? There was a lot of confusion because, again, if you look on the map, it seems quite easy to get down to the next place that we were headed, but in actual fact, you have to cross a body of water. So there's a couple of options, one of which is to go way round by public transport and come back up the other side of the coast. But we figured out a way to get across by ferry after much looking up very dodgy looking timetables.
A lot of time spent looking. People who've not been in Japan might not know this because even though the country is not that large by land area, it's very long. It's very, very mountainous. And when you get down to a place like Kyushu, the coastline just curves endlessly in and out with hundreds of islands. And so getting from point A to point B, which might only be 50, 60 miles, 80 kilometers, whatever, is sometimes not that simple, even with the great transport system. So basically from Sasebo to end up where we wanted to be at our first stop, involved all of this research. And I believe at one point there was something along the lines of, okay, after the wonderful night at Easel, we're going to get up at 6 and get like a 6:45 ferry, which I was most certainly not excited about. But we did end up finding one a little bit later. I've got 8 o'clock written in my notes here. But Philip, you are Mr. You are Mr. Timestamp. So what time was that?
We were in that. I've got a nice one of you in that infamous coat, taking a photograph of the port at 8:11. So it must have been in and around 8:30 or so. You're climbing up on 8:41. There you go, heading up to the top deck like the intrepid traveler that you are. This boat was it was essentially a boat for commuters, actually. So it's not even really a tourist route in that sense. It seems to be, I think there was like 4 or 5 people on it. And it's predominantly for people doing shopping or for high school kids, I think, to come across to go to school in Sasebo. So it was more or less abandoned when we got on it. It was pretty short and very windy, if I remember correctly, but very pleasant experience. And one of those moments where you're kind of like, really? Like, we're doing this just to go to some jazz place? And, it's one of those things where you have to kind of pinch yourself. I mean, it's amazing to be able to do, but I think short of a helicopter, we haven't. There's basically no mode of transport that we haven't used to find one or other jazz joint. So,
but it's pretty amazing because I'm going back to look at the map now. Sasebo, of course, being we talked about a huge port town, but that part of Kyushu, there's a gigantic bay surrounding a peninsula that goes all the way down to Nagasaki, but there's really only one highway that goes along the coast, and on the weekend morning, and we're talking Sunday morning, 8:30, 9 o'clock, if you miss that one bus, you're going to be stuck there. You might as well be in the middle of nowhere, so it was a little bit of a trek, but we really, really did want to do this because I think both of us were intrigued by our first stop. I remember because I didn't know much about this place called Harmony, but I did remember just seeing a photo of the exterior. And it was, well, I go too quickly. We get off the boat, and then do you remember we had to wait a little bit for the bus?
Yeah, well, the other thing is too, right? If you can go around, but if you go around, it takes so much longer, right? So, sometimes again, if we're on a schedule or we're wanting to kind of try and save a bit of time, if you can do something like that where you jump directly across a bay rather than go away around on what's often local buses.
So surreal. It looks like the boat has started anyway. So I don't know if we can hear any of this. But anyway, we're on our second boat of the project. The first one was down also in Kyushu.
Kagoshima on the way to to Sakurajima. Yeah.
So this time...
This one's going to be a little bit shorter.
Yeah, 15 minutes.
15-minute ride across the bay to which will take us on the way to Nagasaki.
Yeah. So we're basically doing a shortcut and we're heading for a place called Harmony. We've spoken to the owner. We've got a couple of local buses, which is a combination of about 70 stops, I think, on the local bus route.
One of us may be napping on that bus ride.
I'm going to write a haiku for each of the stops. And then we're hopefully getting to Harmony for 11:30, and we've already spoken to the owner, and she's assured us that she will be open, and then we're going to make it for Nagasaki. So, yeah, fingers crossed this boat doesn't sink. I mean, if it does sink, you won't be listening to this, right?
No, I guess
Unless
not.
I quickly upload it to Julie.
These microphones are in a mini black box. It's like the lost Tokyo Jazz Joints tapes before their tragic demise in the waters of
They're
Kyushu.
going to pull these up in years. They're going to be like two guys talking about something called a jazz joint. We don't have any record.
Why was there references to punk rock and Britney Spears? We don't understand the mysteries of ancient history.
I think you were quite taken with one of the, I don't know how to describe these. I mean, this is again where we get into sticky water with naval terminology, but I'm going to say she was the captain. I don't know. Is that a thing? You were quite taken with this young lady, if I believe. Now, not for the reasons that listeners may expect. So, do you want to just just elaborate on that in case there's any misunderstanding?
Hard to tell if she was the captain or the co-captain, but I remember when the ferry. Okay, so the ferry pulls in at Sasebo, and again, it's Sunday morning. It's you, me, and maybe 2 or 3 other people waiting for this to cross over the bay, and she just comes bounding out. Looks at us, says like, "You guys here for tickets?" We're like, "Oh, yeah." So we go in and buy the tickets. Comes out, her and the other co-captain drinking coffee, lighting up their cigarettes. Again, 8:30 in the morning on a Sunday. But these two are living this life of the seas. And she has on a wonderful New York Yankees hat. So clearly a sea captain right out of my own heart. So I had to ask her to take a picture. I told her I was from New York and that I was a big Yankee fan. And she was happy to oblige. I think that she thought that we were a little strange because, you mentioned that the ride, although it was short, just a little bit choppy. And when we went up to the top outdoors, immediately she came up running after us and being like, "You guys don't want to be here. You're going to get extremely wet." And we were like,
"No, splash warning, yeah.
No problem. It's fine." And sure enough, we left like 3 minutes later because the water was that choppy. But yes, she was awesome, and her co-captain was also awesome because when we arrived, he actually came out to kind of check on us. Do you remember? He was sort of like, "Do you guys know where you're going?"
Yeah. Well, he gave us a lot of chat. So, I mean, this is the reality of rural Japan. So, I have a photograph of the bus schedule, and this was one of these moments where I was really chuffed because I thought I've done my research here. Because he said, there's not many buses. I'm just counting on one day there's a total of 9 buses, and on a Saturday and a Sunday you just get the 6. And I remember him saying, you have to take a bus, right, and change. And I was like, yeah, there's one coming. And I was able to give him the time, and he was like, oh, okay, so you know what you're doing, which was like a nice feeling. And so we took, I think the original bus, I think was 47 stops, right? So we had to go on one of these local buses where, as you sit on the bus, the price kind of ticks up slowly as you pass each station. But it's probably one of the most entertaining exchanges I've had, as you know, right? Because it's gone on to become a bit of a running joke. So as it happens, you were off somewhere, either sitting inside or using the bathroom, whatever, and I was chatting to him outside, waiting at the bus stop, completely paranoid to leave in case I missed it. There was the little, I don't know if you remember, there's the silver cup with the toothbrush and the toothpaste just sitting below the bus stop.
I remember.
I still don't know whether that was a customer, a passenger, or whether it was, I suspect in Japan that is for cleaning the actual
sign?
Bus stop sign.
But that's the thing, because it wasn't like old. It was like, it was as if somebody just regularly like used it. Yeah, that was just inexplicable.
It's not a clean place to leave your toothbrush either way. But anyway, so we got chatting to this captain, and as it happens, I had a tote bag, which had on one side a picture of a dog, stray dog, and on the other side, it had in both English and kanji, Moriyama Daido, or Daido Moriyama, who, as I'm sure many people will know, is probably one of Japan's, if not the most famous Japanese photographer. Very, very big in the 60s and 70s in particular, internationally known, did a lot of work photographing Shinjuku, particularly around Kabukicho, which obviously close to our hearts in terms of its connection with jazz kisa culture. And this bag I had got as a present from Julie, but also I'd been to see the exhibition that they had on in London. So there's this huge retrospective exhibition at the Photographers Gallery in London. And so I was carrying this bag, great tote bag, lovely size. You can put all sorts in it. And as we were talking, the captain just stopped, and he suddenly pointed at the bag, and he went, Daido Moriyama? Is that you? And I was like, nope, that's not me. And he was like, oh, I thought it was maybe your name. And I was like, nope. So then I sort of turned the bag over.
Just imagine the poor bastard trying to figure out, how is this red-haired guy's name Moriyama?
I know, like he must. I wonder if he listened to any of the previous conversations. So I turned it over. I said, "Oh no, he's actually a very famous Japanese photographer." And I said, "You may be familiar with this." And I turned it over, and the stray dog's like one of his most famous images. And he sort of went, "Oh yeah, I think I might have seen that before and stuff." But I mean, I was still just in that zone of like, at what point did you think that I was Moriyama Daido, even if you didn't know who Moriyama Daido was? So that was a nice little moment to chuckle on as we took these 47 stops. I've got a nice picture of you on that bus, just relaxing there and enjoying the ride. And when
Philip, it's weird because this is a part of Japan, this long peninsula surrounding Omura Bay, right, in Nagasaki Prefecture. Obviously, I had never been there because the two things that it's pretty much most famous for, that people go there for, are the numerous golf courses and the people who sort of do the trail of Japanese Catholic churches. Nagasaki Prefecture was where Christianity first was settled in Japan, and we'll get into that later when we talk about Nagasaki. So a lot of different people who come, they might do like a pilgrimage, checking out some of the Christian sites, and a lot of people go to the various, I think there's 6 or 7 very large golf courses and resorts. Those are two things that are definitely at the very bottom of my list of interests, is golf and Catholic churches. So I've never been to this part of Japan. And I was really impressed because the bus ride, like you mentioned, I mean, it was pretty beautiful. The water, the hills. Obviously, a lot more people go there than we thought. I kind of got the impression, again, it's early Sunday morning, that this is like really the sticks. You know what I mean? But reading about it afterwards, it is quite a destination, even if it does lack the transport. And that is, now we've come full circle, that is how I first heard about about Harmony, you had mentioned it. I'd looked it up, and people had, there's a lot of the Japanese bloggers that I've always mentioned that I get a lot of information from helping out our project.
Hang on a minute. I think you've left out a very important detail.
What was that?
Well, we changed buses, and I don't know if you remember the chocolate that I bought. Possibly the weirdest packaging I've ever seen in any chocolate. I'm just going to send you a photo of it now. There you go.
I do not remember
this?
Chocolate. No. I remember I was drinking my algae, which you made fun of course, but let me see the picture. Hold on. Wow, this is riveting podcasting as I open up. I put up my pictures here. Oh, yes.
Persimmon chocolate.
Yeah,
it was absolutely it was vile to eat, but I bought it as a kind of a souvenir because I thought I've never seen anything quite so bizarre, and the whole thing was themed. There was a whole cartoon on the back with these two characters. But anyway, so as you say, yeah, we changed and we made it for this place, which you knew and I didn't know, and it was one of these kind of roadside joints that we've been to in many different places. It's sort of on the way to somewhere else, right?
Yeah, very much on the road. And, again, it quite stuck out to me because it is, sometimes we talk about places we've been to in the countryside that have that kind of log cabin feeling, especially up in northern Japan, right? But this was pretty much an entirely wooden structure. And what we came to find out was that the master built the entire building by himself. And it's including the beautiful sign outside, which is a sort of a wooden rectangle with a hanging metal sign that says Harmony on it, and it's got the sort of music, the music sign, music notes. And I immediately was like, wow, that's really cool. I wondered how they did that. And we walked in, and the first thing you see is all around the joint are these little metal stainless steel figurines that he makes by hand. He handcrafts them. So not only is the master there, like, obviously really good with the wood because he built it. I mean, remember, Philip, you must have got pictures of the ceiling. It's really high in Harmony, like a really, really high slanted ceiling with all these wooden beams. So he did all of this himself, and he made by hand all of the metal sculptures that you see around the place. So it's very, very visually striking as soon as you walk in.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous place. It's. Oh, I know the sign you mean. Yeah, it's got. Is there there's a motor? Is that motorbike hanging on that, or is that in the distance?
No. The motorbike was on the steps.
No. There's something I'm looking at. It's like an optical illusion. Is that motorbike attached? Anyway, I'll put that. We can put that controversy up ahead on Instagram if anyone wants to dive into that thriller. I think he said it'd been there 16 years, but it was one of those interesting places because although he, certainly in name is the master and obviously built the place, you very much got a sense that it was his wife who was running it, and we were kind of early, I think, or we arrived just in time for them opening, and there was a bit of flapping around. They hadn't quite got stuff ready. She was on the phone to people, but it didn't really faze him because all he did, the sort of good hour that we were there, was essentially just bring us different types of stainless steel constructions that he'd made, right? I mean, that was fundamentally what the experience was. I think we had a nice bit of cake and coffee, but he just kept bringing us things. And I remember when you went to the bathroom at one point, then he produced this penny farthing, which, in fairness is amazing. Like, the stuff that he was making is amazing, but also there's only so many, there's kind of a limit to how many times you can sort of go, and be like really impressed by
well, you had your eye on two particular pieces right from the start. So I think it was more just a thing of, you being polite. You knew which one you were going to end up buying. So,
well, yeah, because we should say he was selling them all, right? So, and there was a couple of specifically jazz related ones. I actually wonder where that's gone since I moved. It must be somewhere
but you know what's weird? I mean, they were for sale, but I didn't get the feeling that he was doing a real hard sell. It was because we asked him about it. We could have gone in and just had our coffee, and I don't think that anything would have even, you know what I mean? But we saw all of the little ones like on the various counters, and then there was one particular like sort of shelf where there were prices. So we noticed that, oh, these things are for sale. He's not just doing this as a hobby. And I think because we start to ask about it and ask about, oh, so you built the place and, the questions we usually do, much more than just a regular customer. And so that's why I think probably his wife was sort of like, oh, well, if you want to buy one, and then like the sales started coming in, but I didn't feel
you
like
weren't so keen, right? When you found out the prices, you weren't so keen because you were thinking of maybe getting something for your daughter, but then when you heard what the prices were, you're like,
yes.
Yeah, it's lovely. That's lovely. And slid it back across the table.
And I kind of regret it, to be honest, because looking back now at some of the pictures, like they're really, really cool. Like especially the music related ones, they are really, really nicely crafted. And so I kind of was like, damn it. And when am I going to get back to Harmony? You know what I mean?
I know what's going to happen. I'm going to spend the rest of today now trying to find that damn saxophone. I bought a beautiful little stainless steel saxophone on a little stand with, and it has Harmony written on the bottom. But I mean, we should probably talk about the jazz side of things as well. There is, of course, I mean, again, it's one of these places that you sort of wonder at the time when it was built, like, was it much more of a jazz place when that was his thing? And now he's kind of gone off into this, metalwork angle. But when you come in on the left-hand side, I mean, they've got that, oh, we did look this up. Is it Kumamoto? That sort of bear icon, that mascot. I think maybe one of them were they're from Kumamoto or something. But somebody can correct me if it's not Kumamoto. But it's one of these Japanese mascots that you get in different places. But I mean, it's a big old place, and actually, when you come in the door, the whole kind of left-hand side of the building is given over to actually a live space. So there's a full drum kit set up with a beautiful and a painting of Art Blakey on the wall, and then a variety of instruments, and there's a guitar, trombone, trumpet, a load of instruments like attached to the wall, and so it's seems to be like a functioning live space.
Oh no,
well,
definitely.
Right?
I mean, you could tell that it wasn't like some of the other places we'd visited where the live events have pretty much stopped. I mean, that equipment was fresh. There was all the cables. There was electric and acoustic guitars, the piano. I've got in the notes that he said that recently they've been down to only 2 live events a month. So that is pretty frequent. Okay. But I would imagine because of the size and because of the location, I mean, everyone living down there is not going to be like us riding buses and ferries to get around, right? They're going to be coming by car.
Yeah.
So it's really not that big of a deal to come from Nagasaki. So they can book a gig and easily get a good 30, 35, 40, even maybe 40 people in there. For a live set. But I would imagine that at this point in his life, that it functions more as a hobby rather than a money maker. I don't reckon that they're getting a big crowd of people in for lunch every day. I don't know. Maybe you never know. I mean, looking at the blog here, he's got. Philip, you missed out because we were on a tight schedule. It looks like you would have loved the hambagu rice lunch set photo I'm looking at here. But we just had a cup of coffee.
They must get a lot of people passing, right? I mean, that's the advantage of somewhere like that, even compared to, say, funny Nanayama that we talked about last week, is that you have, it seemed like that main road heading down towards Nagasaki, or at least two bigger places. So you kind of have that roadside traffic. Funny Nanayama is, maybe a little bit more out of the way. It's not maybe like a main road that you take. It's more of a scenic route, but I mean, lovely place. And
well, it says here on the Japanese blog that this area, Kotoumi, this peninsula that I mentioned, is that Harmony. A lot of the people come there have just finished a round of golf. So I would assume that does make perfect sense because you're driving along this sort of main road. We did see a bunch of other like cafes and roadside places sort of waking up as we got back on the bus after Harmony. So maybe it's a little busier than that first impression. But I definitely think it's more of just a sort of a retirement hobby for him and his wife. But they said they live pretty close. I would have just Philip, I don't know anything about construction. Surely it could not have been cheap.
I would agree with that.
To build this. Yes, Mr. Wardrobe Builder. Sorry. Yes. Please give us your expertise now.
Well,
what would be your estimate for the quality of wood logs that he was using in this beautiful cabin?
Oh, I would say medium to high. That's an official term. That's the official terminology. Yes. I mean, lovely place, and I think also sometimes, getting to some of these places, you get this sense of satisfaction of having kind of achieved it. Like we got the connections we needed, we made it. And also, there's always that thing of, obviously you could stay in Harmony, but there's also that we always have to make that decision of, do we stay? And if you stay, then you're looking at like often another 60 or 90 minutes because the buses are so infrequent. But so it was great to get there, and it was great to see it. And then we set off on whatever the next available bus was to finally reach Nagasaki, which originally we thought we'd be doing by car, but as it turns out, that was not to be the case. So we took another long bus ride via that didn't we stop in quite a nice, it was kind of quite a fancy station, like a new kind of terminal thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we changed.
Yes,
and then took the bus down.
A very boring suburban road by that point, with your superstores and your strip malls and all of that.
Pretty dull, yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of getting eager to get into downtown Nagasaki because, I think I might have mentioned this on a way previous pod when I took my first solo trip down there. But, in all the years that I've been living in Japan, Nagasaki had just never, for whatever reason, it was just somewhere that I'd never been. And so during, the Corona period, when you were still stuck in Ireland, and once they introduced the now legendary discount tickets, which we covered at length on last week's episode, I used one of them to go to Nagasaki and spent the weekend hitting the jazz joints. So, Philip, I think you had been there on either business or maybe on a little vacation, but you had not been down yet for the jazz. Is that right?
No, I'd been a couple of times because I went through this phase of trying to track down what's known as Kakureki Christian, which is very hard to say, but it basically means hidden Christians. If anyone's watched Shogun, they'll know all about it now. But there's a lot of, or at least there was, not so much now, but there was this kind of culture of hidden Christianity, which was a result of the period of the Tokugawa shogunate, where originally, a lot of Japanese had converted to Christianity through particularly Portuguese and then Dutch, Portuguese missionaries and then Dutch traders and things like that. And then when Christianity was outlawed, a lot of Christians were forced to walk over an image of Christ, as known as a fumie. And if people didn't want to do that, they were basically sentenced to death, or many fled to islands off the coast of Nagasaki. And so there was this whole kind of culture grew up where people had almost like a hidden church in their houses. And I have a little figurine that I bought when I was down there, which is this, picture of the canon, the female canon, but on the back has a little cross concealed on it. So I went, and there's a brilliant book by a Japanese photographer all about this culture, and it's quite an old book now. But anyway, so that was one of the things I became obsessed with.
Wow, look at you, Philip! You're full of surprises. We didn't even talk about this in our Nagasaki trip.
So I was down there for that, and then actually went down again just for a holiday. But yeah, neither of those occasions, this was long before Tokyo Jazz Joints, and probably the first trip long before I even knew you. But so I do remember being out on those Goto Islands and then obviously Nagasaki, but I had very little memory of it other than obviously the atomic site and then some of those streets. And when we got there, we landed right in the middle. We suddenly realized why it had been so difficult to find accommodation, right? Because we landed right in the middle of the famous Lantern Festival.
Exactly. So now, again, by the way, wonderful recap there, Philip. And if any listeners are interested in that topic, it is pretty interesting. Look up the novels of Endo Shusaku, who was a Japanese Christian who wrote a lot about that sort of history and just Japanese Christianity in general. But yeah, Nagasaki is so much more, and it's a shame that it's mostly known around the world for its absolutely most tragic experience, which was, of course, the atomic bombing, because there's so much more to it. It was as you mentioned, it was the port where the Portuguese and the Dutch came. They were allowed to live in very only limited areas. It's also where Japan's first Chinatown was. Nagasaki in the southwest of Japan facing Korea and China had, very easy access to become a good port. So there is this amazing sort of history, a sort of a multicultural history that you don't get everywhere in Japan. And so we happened to arrive, and yeah, as you said, it was sort of like, oh, that's why it was so hard for me to get a hotel room, because it was a 3-day weekend, and it was the great sort of like Chinese Lantern Festival where they light up all along the river and tons of side streets as well. I mean, thousands and thousands of lanterns at night. Absolutely beautiful. But it's a big, big tourist draw, not just for people in Kyushu, but from people coming from overseas, from Korea, from Taiwan, from mainland China. So, we were definitely going to be sharing the streets with a lot of different people, but obviously not sharing the jazz joints for the most part. But yeah, we had a chance to drop off the bags. I believe we had a quick bite, and our first stop was a place that I'd visited on my trip previously, which is one of these hybrid joints called Watabe. And Watabe, named after the owner, Watabe-san, is pretty much an even split between classical records and jazz records. And he's got a lot of records in there. I mean, several thousand. And the left side is classical. The right side behind the counter is jazz. And then the speakers and the stereo system are all the way along the back wall. But Watabe, I really liked it, and I really liked the couple. It's not a memorable place sort of when you go in. It's very sterile, very sleek, very clean. There's not really any decoration at all. Nothing at all would stick out about it if you walked by, unless you happen to see the records way behind the counter or the stereo system in the back. But he is playing music all day long on a beautiful set of speakers. I mean, the sound in there was great. But, Philip, what was competing with my concentration on the music in Watabe? Do you remember the corner seats by the windows?
Oh, no, they're going to say my banter.
No, not your banter, which is always lovely.
Yes, I think actually it wasn't just competing with you. I think it was just competing in general. I think even, I got the sense even the owner was kind of at the end of his rope a little bit with it. But
there were two local ladies of an indeterminate age who clearly lived in the neighborhood.
I'd say they were early 70s if
I was trying to be respectful to our elders.
I mean, that's not disrespectful. That's how old they were.
They were in their 70s, and their volume was definitely above from 0 to 100 in the high 70s. They were having a great time. Look, they were enjoying their tea and coffee. They were in there obviously for a while when we came in.
I think they had enjoyed their tea. That they had enjoyed it, I think, would be more accurate. I mean, there was a definite sense of that pot of tea had been bought a good couple of hours ago. So from a purely business point of view, although there wasn't a demand for seats at the time, I would say, I think he was closing early that day, right, because of the Lantern Festival. But
yes,
I definitely got the sense of like, they'd crossed that line where you feel like we should probably order another drink.
But they were clearly locals. And what was curious, though, is, okay, that's great. You're catching up with your friend, your neighbor. You want to have a long, long panchai. You go to the cafe. But why would you go to the music cafe to do that? That was what I found really curious. It was like, this seemed like the kind of people you'd find in your very neighborhood kissa. You know what I mean? Of which there are thousands all around Japan. The time, which ones we've talked about. But they were in Watabe. But yeah, no, I mean, it's not like he asked them to leave or anything, but they were certainly competing with the Coltrane that you, of course, requested, that he put on.
Yeah, I mean, it may well be their local cafe, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, Watabe gave me that kind of, it's sort of Japanese, like sweet shop vibes, the kind of wagashi type shop. It has the fairly standard looking counter. It's got those tables and chairs that you see ever. Even the menu is all very understated. He does have the little slips, and I just wrote something like Coltrane, I think, and he put on Blue Train. But when we came in, they were playing classical. But it's not like, I mean, that's not hidden, right? I mean, on the door, on the sign outside above the awning, it does say classical and jazz, and it's billed as an ongaku kisa. So, he's kind of playing both fiddles in that sense. But yeah, it was nice. I don't know. I'm just not a classical music fan, so it was nice when the jazz came on. And like you said, beautiful sound system. And again, just lucky that we timed it, because I'm not sure we knew that it was gonna close early, but I think when we got there, it wasn't a lot longer after we got there about 2:40, and I feel like that day he was closing around 4 or something like that. So we just got in under the wire.
He closes early anyway at like 5:30. It's one of those places that's only open for like 6 hours or so, because Mr. Watabe is quite old, and when I had visited, he had told me that he couldn't really do the nighttime hours anymore. So, not that was the kind of place you'd imagine a lot of people going at night. I don't even think that they served alcohol, but yeah, he was closing because, I mean, the location of Watabe was literally one street behind sort of where the Chinatown area is in Nagasaki. And there were a lot of events going on. It was sort of live music and a theater performance sort of at the plaza. And so, yeah, he was closing up pretty early. So look, Watabe is a great, I mean, if you're down there, it's a wonderful spot to go have coffee. It's not going to win any awards for being, one of the great kisa ever. I think it's just a great spot for some good music. And yes, you not being a classical fan, it's interesting. That was new news to me.
What? I hope you're joking. Anyway, so Watabe, done. Check. Been there. Jazz and classical and jazz, depends on your favorite genre, but really nice spot. And just a little kind of amuse-bouche or palate cleanser before the final place that we went to in Nagasaki. Now, it wasn't actually the final place in that sense, but again, this was one of these days where between the festival and the weekend and all these kind of things, we hit the kind of Rubik's Cube of opening hours and opening days and all that kind of stuff. So we have a couple of other real classic Nagasaki spots that we went to, but we didn't make it to them on that day, and we'll get to those in the next episode. But the final spot that we, after we checked into the hotel and dumped our bags and had some dinner, I think, we went to a place called Milestone, which was opened in 1986. Now, this is also a place that you had been to previously, isn't that right?
Yes, Milestone I had been to. In fact, I remember it was literally was a milestone for me. It was the 250th joint that I had visited. So I remember being really happy. I treated myself to an extra drink that night. I was there a couple years ago. But Milestone is... wow, there was just so many great things about it. I always go on and on about how much I love signs. Milestone has two of the best signs. One in the stairwell in particular, a gigantic one, black with like bright red and blue coloring and the lighting.
Looks like a matchbox, doesn't it?
It's just great. And and it also has one of the nicest views, if not the nicest views of any jazz joint, because the entire back wall is almost a floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river in Nagasaki, where the streetcar also drives by. So and as you mentioned, we're lucky that it's the Lantern Festival. We get in there, we sit down at the window table, and you look out, the sun's slowly going down, the lanterns are on, the streetcar tram's going by, you've got the river and people walking, and it's just the most pleasing, relaxing place to sit and have a drink. I mean, it's one of my favorite locations of any jazz bar we visited. The owner, I don't think he remembered me until I prompted him. And again, this seems to be the theme of all of our recent podcasts, Philip, but there was a noticeable difference in the way.
In fairness, you do get that reaction. You get that reaction from most people. Like, I mean, I don't...
It's only because I'm so unobtrusive when I go in to do my jazz exploring. I'm not prancing around with a camera, knocking things over, and asking.
I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to just say because you're so forgettable. But I mean, obviously that wouldn't be true. Especially with that coat on.
It's very polite Japanese, always a gentleman. No, he did remember me once I mentioned what we talked about, because he was one of those dudes that gave us a top 10 story. He gave me the full lowdown. I think you and I talked with him a little bit about this, about Elvin Jones's time in Nagasaki, because Elvin's wife, Keiko Jones, very well known among jazz fans. Was from Nagasaki, and they, in between a lot of the tours, they would spend a lot of time there. And at some point, Elvin came up with the idea of opening his own jazz club, which was apparently, according to the master at Milestone, most vigorously opposed by his wife, for reasons that we came to understand as the story continued, because Elvin, as great as he was a musician, did not necessarily have the business skills to run a club. And I was like, well, yeah, running a club's hard, but what do you mean? Like he didn't hire a manager or he spent too much? And he's like, no, he basically would just like not really, seek out bands to charge high fees. He just would play with whoever would come in and wanted to play with him if he was there. And, literally that could have been like students at the university or amateur musicians or a pro that happened to be around and visiting and came by. And I was like, wait, slow down a second, slow down. So you're telling me Elvin Jones was hanging out in this little club that he owned in Nagasaki, and a student would just walk in and be like, hey, can we just jam with you? And Elvin, being the very gregarious person that he supposedly was, just loved music so much that he would just play and even sometimes forget to charge people. And so obviously the club didn't do very well financially, and eventually they closed it. I think it was only open for a couple of years. I've got to go back and check my old notes on that. But that's a story that I know a lot of old jazz heads in Japan remember. But yeah, I mean, Elvin, man, can you just, how cool is that? He's just, oh yeah, come in, I'm going to play with you. Me, the man who recorded Live at the Vanguard with John Coltrane, am more than happy to jam with an 18-year-old college student, so hip.
I mean, it sort of says a lot, really, doesn't it? Like in terms of just, like a sense of humility and, not sort of so arrogant that you wouldn't do that or wouldn't go near people, and obviously, particularly in a country where, respect and the whole senpai system and, that whole kind of hierarchy is so important. Like, I mean, it must have been kind of mind blowing if you could go in and just do that,
Well, he, that was one thing. I mean, Elvin Jones with the Jazz Machine, he always had, was recruiting younger musicians with potential that he saw. He loved leading a band of younger musicians. So it's definitely something that was in his personality. Like you said, not a lot of jazz musicians always would do that. But, as a business plan, if you're trying to run a club, you also understand Keiko's position. It's like, hey, look, man, you can't be just opening it as a bar. Like, we're gonna, you know what I mean? If you're gonna be playing, you have to charge people, okay? Otherwise, they're not gonna come to your proper gigs if they could just come by here and have a drink. So, yeah, definitely probably not one for business strategy 101. But I loved hearing that story, and the master was telling us a bit more too about not, because I was like, look, Nagasaki, you've got at least 3-4 really legendary jazz keys and jazz bars, but why no live clubs? And he was saying like, look, in Kyushu, most of the live music scene is obviously in Fukuoka. There's a little bit in Kumamoto. A lot of the musicians just couldn't really make a living here. It is a smaller population. You do get a lot of tourists, but that's not necessarily people that are going to, not like us going to the jazz gigs. So he said one by one, most of the clubs have closed. And the only places you can hear live jazz at now are sort of like an all-genre live house, but you would never call that a jazz club. So I was a bit bummed to hear that, because it does have this great history. A lot of Japanese jazz musicians came from the area, obviously the Elvin as well. But in terms of live music, it was pretty much dying out, and so I was really bummed to hear that.
Well, the night we were there, it was just, we went reasonably early, I think, as well, but it was about 6:00, but we were the only two there. And then someone did, I think a Japanese guy, or was maybe a Chinese tourist, actually, possibly, turned up, I remember, because there was a bit of back and forth on the phone. I think someone called and they were obviously trying to figure out where it is. But like you say, just stunning place and stunning view. And a couple of real interesting curiosities too. Of course, there's the huge wall-sized painting of the Kulese Mama, a John Coltrane cover, branded with Jazz and Boo's milestone, that I think a customer might have done, that's on the back wall, which is kind of just stunning.
Yes,
if nothing else, for its complete size, right? It's huge. I mean, it's enormous. Three
times the size of a normal poster. But I mean, yeah, but more than that, not just how cool it is being branded, but that's not an album you think. I mean, you're a Coltrane fan, Philip, and I am. This is not one that's going to appeal to a lot of casual listeners or jazz listeners who don't like their stuff. That's a very heavy album. And so it was an interesting choice, especially because it's also one of Coltrane's just not as famous. I don't even think it was released in his lifetime. Isn't that one of those ones that Impulse put out after he died?
I think it was posthumous, yeah.
Yeah. So seeing that was it was kind of like, oh wow, that was a really interesting choice to choose that album. I mean, it is a beautiful portrait of it's one of those ones where Coltrane's sort of silhouetted in darkness with just his forehead kind of and part of his suit in the light, and the saxophone way up front. It's a beautiful album cover, and it's a beautiful it's not a poster. I think it was a painting, wasn't it? It's not actually a poster.
Yeah, no, it's not a poster. No, it's a painting. And actually, no, Kurosumama was released in 1965. So
no, it was recorded.
Released.
It was recorded in 1965. It was definitely not released then.
No, it was released in 1965. So it was one of the ones that was released during his lifetime.
No, that's not right. I've got in my impulse notes here, released January 1967.
Oh, well, in that case. Well,
he was still alive in January 1967.
He was still alive in 1967,
too. Oh, okay. It says the last album released during his lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, okay.
That's getting
another controversy put to bed there.
gotta be accurate. We're talking about St. John.
As I often say at the listening events, I am not a jazz aficionado. I am a photographer who loves jazz. So that's just evidence there that is true. Also, just one other thing. I don't know if you remember. It's one of the more innovative toilet roll dispensers I've ever seen, but if you remember, in the toilet there was a bottle, an old wooden whiskey bottle case, like the sort of wooden cask case that you get a bottle of whiskey in. It was a 25-year-old anniversary malt Macallan, and the owner had repurposed that as a toilet roll dispenser. So you slide up the lid of the box to reveal a new roll of toilet roll. I don't know if you remember that. I had actually forgotten myself, but I happened to have photographed it.
Yeah, I must have not. No, I didn't remember that, and I always bring my phone to the bathroom so I can, as we've mentioned so many times, there's always interesting.
You may have been otherwise engaged
in the jazz in the jazz joint bathrooms. There's always something interesting going on in there. But I don't remember that. I do remember outside he had quite a lot of bottles of whiskey of rare brands of whiskey that he stocked. But that I didn't remember from the bathroom. No.
Well, look, talking of outside, once we left Milestone, we had a kind of a slightly, I don't know if you remember, we had a slightly bizarre evening, because one of the other places, and probably the real gem in Nagasaki, is Saruman, which I know you had been to previously. And there was a lot of, because the city's not that big and because of where we were staying, we ended up passing Saruman in particular 2 or 3 times. And it was confusing because the sign was out. There was also another permanent sign in the street. But when we looked up, the lights seemed to be off, but then at other times, other lights in the building seemed to be on. So there was 2 or 3 times that we went up the stairs of Saramanian in the hope that it might be open. And then, of course, there was the mystery of Django, which we also will talk about in the next episode. But It was on the shopping street round the corner from Saramanian.
Yes.
Literally, we must have gone 4 times. And each time, if you remember, the shutter was slightly higher. So we were like, oh, they must definitely be opening. And we can reveal what was going on in the next episode there. But we were so confused. It was genuinely like someone was messing with us, because every single time we went back, it was like slightly different. We're like, oh, it must be opening now, because I think at least one of them, if not Saramani and definitely Django, we had expected to be open that evening. So we finished off that evening. We finished off that night with a fairly expensive yakiniku dinner, if I remember correctly, which we kind of only realized once we got in and looked at the menu. But just before we did that, we took in one final kind of curiosity, if you remember, a place called Blue Note, which, to all intents and purposes, when you hear the name Blue Note, you think, well, it must be a jazz place. But we were very soon, that idea was very soon debunked once we got in. Do you remember Blue Note?
Oh, of course. Blue Note, obviously, at one point had been a proper jazz keys, open in the daytime. And what's really interesting is the current owner, who's been there for about 6 or 7 years, so he not only did he keep the name, he kept the sign, which clearly rips off the Blue Note font from their albums, and he kept a lot of the sort of jazz, paraphernalia around the place. A couple of framed albums, some smaller posters and postcards here and there. So he's kept all of that, and yet the music has completely changed. He's basically playing, well, he has got a couple different genres, but he had some pop, some rock, some light soul, some fusion, some jazz. He was playing actually some jazz fusion when we went in on CD. He did have a shelf of vinyl. And when I asked him about that, he said, "Oh yeah, that's mine. I brought it from home." And I was like, "Okay, that's really interesting." So clearly the guy is a music fan. He's not 100% just into jazz, and that's fine. But I didn't obviously say this to him. "Hey, Philip, I think I've gotten soft as I've gotten older, because just 10 years ago, I think I would have just been like, dude, why are you calling this place Blue Note, man? You know what I mean? Like, come on. That's really misleading and insulting. You got to change the name of the joint." But didn't say anything. He was quite friendly guy. Actually, he spent a lot of time in Yokohama, so he knew like where I live and where I go out with jazz joints in Yokohama. So we talked about that quite a bit. He said that a lot of students come here because it's one of the cheaper bars in the area to drink in. I thought, well, that's interesting. Okay, but yeah, it was just sort of a weird, like, very Japanese has the great phrase "chutohampa," which is basically sort of halfway there. You're sort of in between. You know what I mean?
Yeah, neither one or the other, right?
Yes.
That was very much the thing. Although, like you say, I mean, there was decent drinks and there was a few other customers when we were there. And yeah, like you say, he was a nice guy. Talk of the devil, actually. I have a photograph. The only photograph I have from there is in the toilet. There's actually a sticker with Blue Note, not the label, but like kind of like a jazz band. And it's got this Blue Note written below it. So I don't know if that's a sticker from the original place. But also, of course, in the main area, in the main room, there was actually a signed photograph of Elvin Jones. And it says on the glass of the frame, it says, "To Blue Note Jazz, love always, Elvin Jones." It's 1979. It's dated December 79. And what's really interesting is the photograph is actually called The Jones. And it's Hank Jones, Elvin Jones, and Thad Jones, which is pretty cool. Like, gorgeous. So, he was obviously there or thereabouts at one time, certainly when it was more of a jazz place. But, I mean, it's hard to know, right? I mean, like, it's just a bar now, but I think it was kind of interesting from an archaeological point of view, right, where you could sort of discern that it used to be a jazz place, and there were still those signs of it having been so, but obviously no longer, strictly speaking, like a jazz joint, and certainly based on our definition of what it would be,
He did have an absolute Hall of Fame bit of random bric-a-brac, though, which will not be of any interest to you, but to our American listeners. He had on one of the shelves a copy of Dennis Rodman's autobiography, nice. where Dennis is on the cover fully naked with a basketball covering his male parts. And so that kind of jumped out to me as well, like, wow, okay, so the dude is obviously a basketball fan. And the thing is, I remember as well, right next to the Dennis Rodman book was a poster for some Belgian beer. So it was sort of like, wow, okay, this guy's really got a lot of different things going on in here. But yeah, shout out to the master for the Dennis Rodman book. Yeah, that was unexpected.
I'm just recovering from you using the phrase male parts, which sounds like you went to Google Translate and you were like, what are these called? It was like male part.
I was about to say Johnson, and then I thought, no, God, that's too much of a Big Lebowski callback. So
it's when you were talking about Nagasaki that just reminded me, just to finish with a story, actually, because I suppose in some ways Nagasaki, I'll always have a soft spot for it, because actually when I was at university and I originally applied for the job that took me out to Japan, which is part of the JET program as it was known at the time, I genuinely knew nothing about Japan. I didn't speak Japanese. I hadn't studied anything about Japan. And I didn't even honestly really know anything about the country at all. It just stumbled into this opportunity. And when I got through the original shortlisting kind of process, you were given an interview, and I went to the consulate in Edinburgh, Japanese consulate in Edinburgh, to do my interview. So I must have been 21 at the time. And I remember coming in and sitting down beside 2 or 3 people, and they had all these notes, and they were like really studiously going through all these notes. And I just remember thinking, shit, like, I don't know what I'm going to say here. Like, they were like into like anime and like all this kind of stuff, and they knew all these names. And I was like, this is not going to go well. So when I went in, one of the questions, and this is the only question I remember the whole interview, was, what 3 places would you like to go to in Japan? And I was like, well, Tokyo, because I knew that one. And because it's the capital, and it's so futuristic and all this crap, right? And then I rearranged the letters and said Kyoto, because it's obviously the traditional capital, and it would be a really nice counterbalance to Tokyo, to see what Japan's really like. And all the time, these old boys from the consulate in their black suits are all like writing all this stuff down, and going, oh yeah. And then the only other place I could think of was Nagasaki. And the only reason I knew that was because of the history with the atomic bomb and World War II. So I said, which is terrible now, but I said, well, obviously I'd like to go to Nagasaki too, because, I know, coming from Belfast and living in Glasgow, how places can have a reputation that precedes them, and, people have a certain image of what they're like, and actually when you live there, they're really not like that at all. And so for that reason, I would love to go and visit Nagasaki. And these guys were like, oh yeah, also go. I'm like writing all this stuff down, and I just thought, this is the biggest just fake out ever. Like, what, I was just really winging at the time. But it's funny how it works out, right?
It's right. No, Philip, it's actually, hey, unintentional or not, that's actually a great answer, because like I said earlier, I mean, people know Nagasaki for that, and then you get there and you're like, not only is it in a physically beautiful location with the hills and the water, but again, I mean, if you look at the map, Nagasaki is closer to Busan in Korea and Shanghai in China than it is to Tokyo, much closer actually, and so it has that, even some of the local cuisine, you get that little feeling of like, oh, this looks a bit more like Chinese food, Some of the place names are a little bit unusual. How do you read these Chinese characters, the kanji, it doesn't look like the rest of Japan. So it's definitely got, and of course, like you mentioned, the Portuguese and the Dutch and all of this. So, and for our purposes, the jazz, it's got a city with so much to offer. It's a shame if people who come to visit Japan, and we know, as we've talked about, it's just this endless boom of tourism, only know it for that, or only come and visit, the museum. Yes, you should visit the museum. Every living human should visit the museum, whether in Nagasaki or Hiroshima. As overwhelmingly horrible as an experience as it is, it's important to do that. But don't reduce a really great town, just to that. So yeah, I could totally imagine these guys thinking like, oh wow, this guy, he's really thinking deeply about Japan as well. We're going to offer him the job for sure.
Well, it makes a change for you. It makes a change for you to not be offending a local tourist board somewhere. So that's nice to hear. But it's interesting, because, I mean, in my defense, I did eventually, learn the language. I did learn about the country. And it's just funny, I think, because, that was an opportunity that I stumbled into. And yet now here we are talking about these places and this project, 30 years later. So it's kind of incredible how things work out. So there'll always be a soft spot for Nagasaki, if not just because I completely exploited its reputation to answer a question in an interview that I didn't really have anything else to say about. So thanks, Nagasaki. And thank you for this week. It's been class to chat about this trip, particularly that morning of that boat trip. I just remember being so buzzed to be able to do that and get to these places. And I've lost track already of what day we're on now. I think we're on day 4, are we, of this trip already? Let's see. We got Brownie 1, we got Jam 2, we got Funny now. Yeah, we're on day 4 now of this trip, and we still got one more day for you and me, after which then we'll move on to chat about some of the places.
Oh, with a lot more great stuff to come from Nagasaki with Saruman and Django, and then yes, you continued on your adventure to the wilds of Kyushu Island, way in the southeast coast. So I can't wait to talk about that, and plenty more to come. So always a pleasure, my friend.
Likewise, you take care of yourself. We'll talk in a couple of weeks' time.
You betcha.